In this final section of Lecture 1, I'm going to give a brief overview of what we'll be covering in the rest of the course. We'll be proceeding along two main lines. First of all, for the next 3 weeks, encompassing 5 lectures, we'll be covering material relating to the economic development of Western Europe and its offshoots, especially the United States. Then, for the next 3 weeks, encompassing 4 lectures, we'll be looking at other major regions of the world and their experience with economic development. Next week, with Lecture 2, we'll begin with the Malthusian era. We'll also cover the rise of the Atlantic traders and the scientific revolution. Lecture 3 will be about the Industrial Revolution, what it was, why it happened, how it spread once it had started, what its consequences were, and how contemporaries thought of this major event. Week 3 will be about the 100 years after the Industrial Revolution, and there'll be 2 main focuses in that lecture. First of all, the period when countries became much more integrated economically, known as the first era of globalisation, and then the rise of the US to become the economic and technological leader in the world economy. In the first part of the 20th century, there were 2 world wars and major dislocation of the Great Depression. In Lecture 5, we'll look at that phase and look at some of the consequences, such as the effects on economic thinking out of events like the Great Depression. Following World War II, there was a period of rapid economic growth known as the Golden Age. We'll begin by talking about that period and go through to the present, finishing up by talking about the global financial crisis. We'll also address several other themes that characterise this period, including reglobalisation of the world economy and the rise of female labour force participation. Then we'll move on to other major regions of the world economy. We'll begin in week 5, lecture 7, by talking about Japan and a group of economies known as the high-performing Asian economies. Focus in these lectures will be on the characteristics of these countries and the period that allowed them to grow very rapidly. Lecture 8 will be about China and the Soviet Union. The focus here will be on the consequences of these economies adopting command-based, centralised methods of organising economic activity, and what happened when they began to roll back those approaches to organising economic activity from the 1970s onwards. Lectures 9 and 10 will be about Latin America and Africa respectively, and a major theme in these lectures will be about the barriers that prevent countries and regions growing. So why is it that regions such as Africa, Latin America don't seem to have captured the benefits of improvements in knowledge about how to produce that came from the Industrial Revolution? And for example, we'll use the framework of the fundamental determinants that I talked about earlier in this lecture, thinking about geography, institutions, culture, contact with success, to try to understand the economic performance of these regions. We'll finish up in week 8 with an overview lecture. Part of this lecture will involve me giving an overview, seeking to bring together sort of all the material we've studied, to think about some main themes and how we might apply the material we've studied, but also it will be an opportunity to address issues that you've raised about the material we've covered during the subject. I've chosen material in the subject to try and give a broad coverage of major events and themes in the history of economic development. I've tried to say something about most of the major regions in the world, although not everywhere. And I've tried to cover as many different topics as I can. So, for example, as well as talking about the overall history of economic development, to look at some more specific issues as well, such as the way the organisation of work has changed, or the way thinking by economists about the economy has changed. Inevitably, with a subject that is so vast and with a limited amount of time to present, I've had to be selective in what I'm choosing to present. But I've tried to adopt sort of a mix of giving an overview to get a perspective on the big picture of economic development, but also to drill down to be more specific about particular issues and about the experience of particular countries. If you haven't studied economic history, the history of economic development before, then I hope you'll think of this course as a starting point for you to develop your own understanding about this subject. Studying history is about developing a knowledge of what happened and then trying to construct that into patterns, themes and causal linkages that allow you to understand and apply the knowledge of what happened in history. And really, the only way to develop that knowledge is by doing lots of reading yourself about the subject, the particular historical subject you're interested in this case, the history of economic development. To assist you in doing that, for the course as a whole and for each lecture, I've put together a short suggested reading list with what I think some of the main key readings and references are that would allow you to get a further understanding of the material in the subject. There's a wealth of interesting, informative, well-written material on the history of the world economy, and so I really encourage you to use this course as a springboard for reading some of that material to deepen your understanding of the subject once you've looked at the material in the lectures.